Hi, this is Zoe Routh, and welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. We're in the middle of a series called Points of View, and this week we're taking the point of view of a team coach, specifically with Bernie Ferguson of Atlassian. Very exciting to have you here with us, Bernie. I met you first a couple of weeks ago when we were both speaking at the Get Shit Done event, and yeah, it was great to see you in action and to see you live. Bernie has 15 years of working in agile teams at scale, so heavy in the tech space. And how long have you been at Atlassian, actually?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks. So probably just getting close to 5 years. So yeah, it seems like a long time. I think when I started here, there was around 740 staff, and we're close to 4,000 now. So it's grown a lot over the last 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Atlassian is like Australia's poster child for IT success. So it's exciting that we have you on board. And the work that you've been doing there has been integral to scaling successfully, because that's a big leap in staff numbers from 740 to over 4,000. Like, that's just ripe for all sorts of dramas when it comes to culture and so on. So I'm hoping we might get a little bit of an insight into some of that stuff, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right. So tell us a little bit about your background, like reading your bio and and scoping you out as you do, cyber stalking you on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I saw that you started in media and then you've ended up in Atlassian. So what's that? Like, tell me about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. I mean, it kind of, interestingly enough, I would almost trace it back to early days as a teen, like almost as a child working. My father had a business and we would cut cables and put motherboards into PCs. And I had this fascination with technology, but was lucky for me actually that I learned early on that I'm actually not that technically gifted. So when it comes to like coding and sitting still for a long period of time and all of the things necessary to be really strong in technology, maths particularly, definitely recognize it wasn't one of my strengths. But I was also fortunate enough to realize that my skill kind of sits in working with people and being organized and like driving things to delivery and getting stuff done, basically. So when we had a discussion in the conference that we were at with the other day, which was Getting Stuff Done Club, that was like perfect. It was a really fit in my wheelhouse quite well. So with that, eventually I sort of, after leaving school and traveling around Asia for a little while, I actually started wanting to start my career to bridge the divide from what business people would say to what technologists would say, going back 15 years sort of thing. A lot of the time that what technology people were trying to say and the way they were trying to portray information was really confusing to folks in the business, and then and vice versa. So my early career started off as a business analyst. I wanted to bridge that gap. And over a number of different roles, from financial services to little consultancies to what we'd call the startup today, I guess, really trying to build on that project and program management space. And then I spent, like you mentioned, a few years in media working on digital properties, some of the highest volume websites in Australia, particularly.
What's a digital property?
I would say like any digital product. Like at that stage, it was like SMH and The Age and domain.com, like these type of sites, or any sort of digital product. Yeah. And then from there, moving into Atlassian was a really great move for me to build on those skills and to really focus not only on the delivery side of how products are delivered, digital products are delivered, and how we go about servicing a global market, those type of things, but really to dial in on like how we can get teams to be more effective in working together. And that's what led me over time to be into this current role, which is around coaching, training, education, and really helping teams to be more effective at delivering digital products that help to fill a specific problem or customer need and derive benefit for the businesses of which they operate in.
So I think it's a little unusual for businesses to have team coaches. Executive coaching came out maybe like 15, 17 years ago. It was kind of in the newbie type set of industries. Like it was a new thing back then. And then executive coaching is it's much more mainstream now. What is this team coaching stuff? Like, how did that start off at Atlassian?
Yeah, look, when I mentioned before, as spending a bit of time as a teacher and working as it like through academic pursuits through universities and stuff, and then to build that digital experience, I felt like those teaching skills and the digital product delivery experience were really nice to sort of confluence and bring together to focus on helping teams to be more effective. So much of what we do and when we collaborate and work together, really, there's that human dynamic that's at play is so critical to success. And that's the thing I really wanted to focus on as a coach. I think in the agile industry, particularly, there are a lot of agile coaches, and that is a growing industry. But
Really?
yeah, if anything, it probably focuses a little heavily on the process side. Like if you want to adapt this process in how to run an agile project, these are the things that you need to do, and this is how to do them.
Yeah.
Whereas what I'm looking to do is trying to differentiate that, to sort of say, yeah, you can run whichever process that you want. However, the most important thing is how you collaborate effectively as a team, how you bring in your customer into your problem space, and how you deliver and then ultimately drive a continual improvement loop into the way you work and what you deliver.
So a lot of that is about team dynamics, how people show up and communicate and interact and so on. What was the most surprising thing you learned or have observed as a team coach about how people interact?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the real lessons I've learned over the last 2 to 3 years is there's such importance behind having clarity of purpose, having a shared understanding as a collective group within a team of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you will measure success. Like those three questions are so important, and I often spend a lot of time. I've been fortunate that we have at Atlassian, we have a tool called our Atlassian Team Health Monitor. I'll give that a plug here because it's essentially an hour-long conversation that you'll have with the team to introspectively look at how the team is performing and to really understand like areas for improvement and things you're doing well and not improving. And having done literally hundreds of those sessions and hours and many hours of that sort of consulting, coaching type work, it's very common that teams will struggle to get clarity around their purpose. There'll be assumptions at play, or some people will think this, or I thought it was this. And these things happen all the time in teams, and without a consistent discussion and dialogue and then a focus on having clarity, teams can really just go off the rail. And I think that's one of the most important things that I've kind of took for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah, by solving for that really does help teams to be more high performing.
So let me just check. So that was the Atlassian Team Health Monitor. Did I get the name of the document right?
Yeah, it's actually like a practice or a play or an activity that you can do with a team. So it's maybe I could provide the link for the listeners here. But what we could do is essentially an hour that you would spend with the team to go through and have a discussion on like what is working well, what can we improve, similar to other kind of rituals. But ultimately, this is really focused in on the components of a team that are focused on how they are working and what they're working on and how they're delivering value.
Okay, that would be awesome. So if you can give us a link to that, I'll put it in the show notes, which will be at zoerouth.com/podcast/Bernie, Bernie. So that would be great. Yeah. I'm sure people find that of huge value. So clarifying purpose has been the big thing as part of this. You said something also about measuring success. I'm obsessed a little bit actually about measuring success because I've seen people have really don't do this well. So how do you go about setting measures for success with teams?
Yeah, it's easy to jump into solution mode when you think you know the right thing to do without stopping to say is like, how would we measure success? What would be the end outcome we're looking to achieve? So often teams will be focused on the process or their output, like what are they delivering? We're shipping this, we're shipping that, all that sort of stuff, but to what end? Like what is the outcome you want to ultimately deliver? And then very early in a concept or initiation phase for an idea or a project or something of that nature, it's just taking the time to be really crystal clear on what you can do to measure either quantitatively or qualitatively or like the outcome that you want to achieve. So having a session with the team to sit down is like, how will we measure success for this particular project, and getting everybody on board with that, and then getting your sponsors and your customers to sign up to it. That's a really important critical step to what I would highly recommend teams and projects do before they actually get into the delivery mode.
Can you give us an example? So if you're launching a project A, like a program that you want to deliver to customer B, what would be an example of getting beyond we're just going to get the project out?
Absolutely. So we might be saying the customer satisfaction in terms of like their net promoter score for this project has gone from this number to that number. That might be the ultimate measure of success. Or we might see that usage of this particular feature is at a particular level or something of that nature. Or this particular customer pain point that we've recognized, we've been able to address that and we've moved the needle from here to there. That's the type of thing that you would look for. And that's the outcome that you want to achieve. And with that in mind, that kind of becomes your North Star, or that's the goal. And then underneath that, you start to strategize ways of things that you would do to get there. So for example, hey, we want to take this customer pain point and we want to move it from here to there. What we might do is, like, when you have a bit of clarity on what that customer pain point might be, it might be, say, for example, could be like in my sign up process, there's a lot of drop off here because there's a bad user experience and therefore it's really hard for customers to continue on through that process flow. Then you would start to optimize for how do we improve the process flow and how would you actually improve that product or feature that you're delivering.
Love it. So let me paraphrase that and make sure I've got it. So customer pain is, I go onto this website and it's too much of a pain in the bum to fill out this form, so I just get out of there. And so your customer, who is the website owner, is going, that's a problem because I'm losing customers. And so the project then is to improve that particular block in the process so that customers are staying through the registration process and hopefully going through to sale. Is that kind of a correct translation?
Yeah, that's a good example. But ultimately, the point is that you started with there's a customer satisfaction issue that you're wanting to deal with, and that's the higher level objective that you're after.
Right.
And then you start to strategize ways to go about delivering on that. Thing about what I've particularly working with in technology, you don't have to know all the information on the what necessarily, like what you will do to start out. So you can try stuff and then you can fail and you can learn. You can test things. It's very cheap to do that. So as long as you're centered around like the outcome you want to achieve, the why, thinking about different approaches or experiments that you can run to sort of get to that why is the thing that you should really optimize for speed.
Okay. So it might be the ultimate why is that customers sign up to the client services more easily and readily and are become happy raving fans, something like
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And then you could go, hey, sign up flow, or it could be the email that you get to get their user credentials or whatever it might be. Then you start to test the different things that you might do to drive that ultimate outcome.
Okay. So let's come back to your role as team coach. So tell me what you actually do. Like there's the guys who are, or the people, guys as in generic guys, working on a project, and your job is to do what as a coach?
Yeah, it's a good question. So essentially, it's almost the first level of abstraction. I think teams, particularly when they're in their execution mode, get very hung up on running at the thing and trying to deliver. It's hard at times to pull yourself away from the doing to like introspectively look and see how could we improve. So as a coach, you'd sit down there with them and say, you'd kind of observe for a little while, like observe their practices and their behaviors and the way that they're working, and then kind of map that out. It's like on a Monday we do this, on a Tuesday. You can get to quite a low level of detail with that. And then you sit down with the team and then you walk them through it, and it's like, why do you do that? And then more often than not, they're like, oh, I thought we did that because of this reason. And then there's different assumptions of the practices that a team will actually run, which is a fascinating conversation. It's like, oh, I thought we did that for this reason, or didn't so-and-so want us to do that? Or we started that 6 months ago and we just still do it. Do you know what I mean? So no one's actually challenging them to go through their practices and their processes to find ways to improve or to eliminate waste or to get the real value out of the interactions that they're having. So as a coach, you're sort of like challenging teams up front. Like, why are we doing this? Like, how can we improve? What's the things that you recognize as areas that you are doing well and you want to do more of? So you sort of start by challenging. And then once you've got that sort of awareness within the team, then you start to build the practices and behaviors and then enable the team to build those capabilities if they have any gaps. And once those capabilities are built, then it comes to like a supporting functions, like support them to make that a consistent behavior, and it's not just a sugar high, and then they go back to, they would revert to old practices.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions in that. So when you say you observe them over a period of time and you map out their processes,
Yeah.
when you say map out, do you draw it or do you itemize it? Like
Yeah, I
what
actually think
technically?
it's really high tech. It's just a whiteboard and a post-it notes and stuff like that. Just
Yeah.
wrap it out in their area, and then it's good because everyone walks past it every day, and then there starts to being really front of mind. It starts to brings this front of mind sort of focus to like, how are we working? How can we improve the way we work, rather than just coming in every day and just doing. I know that you've probably heard, every health professional will say to you, if you want to get fit, you got to eat the right food. Prevention is better than cure, a doctor would say. And it's the same for teams. Like, mapping it out, showing them what they're doing and saying, actually, when you're doing these things, you're not eating good food, you're not doing solid practices or behaviors, and then making them aware of that and then helping them to build the positive behaviors. That's
So your whiteboard and post-it notes be like Monday, post-it note,
yeah.
like standing meeting 10 minutes or something like that. Is that what you mean by how you map it out?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So we'll have
Okay.
those around the floor. I mean, obviously, products are great to help with that as well. At Atlassian, we have a product called Jira, which is a really amazing project management tool.
What's
And
it called?
Jira,
Kira.
Jira, yep, J-A-I-R-A.
Okay. Jira. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a really great tool, and Trello is another awesome tool that will help you to map out the workflow stages for a team. So you can use that ultimately, that's where work gets done. But there's nothing wrong with bringing in like some of the more tactile versions of it on a whiteboard and get people in front of that and sparring on it, and then sort of sharing ideas and thinking about how they can improve. And then once they've got that workflow or practice, and then taking it back into their tools or their products that they're using to make them ingrain those behaviors.
So I'm also curious about your perspective watching teams. Like if you've been doing this for 15 years, you've seen a lot of team process.
Yeah.
How do you, I'm not sure if you actually do this, do you suspend judgment as you notice what people are doing? Like you observe their process and you can, in your mind, you're going, oh, they're doing that. That looks clunky, or I know that's not going to work. Do you suspend that inner voice of judgment knowing that there's a better way of doing stuff? Or do you say in coach facilitator mode where you get them to come up with their own answers?
Yeah, the currency of a coach is questions. It's not opinions. So by working with teams to ask them questions, they know their context better than any you will ever do, because ultimately they're ingrained in the work that they do. They sometimes just need that level of introspection that you can help to provide. But by using questions, you can challenge them. And with that, then what ultimately will happen is that through that curiosity and through those questions, people will start to not be obviously feel as though you're coming with the answer. The answer, like I do a lot of facilitation, as you can imagine, Zoe, but the answer is always in the room. So as a facilitator, it's about eliciting that information, challenging folks, and getting them to think differently to come to a solution that they ultimately own.
Do you ever get tempted just to blurt out, do it this way?
Yeah, from time to time, I'll be honest, of course. But I would do that again through, what I say and what I do might be different from time to time, I'll be honest. But so it'll be like, have you considered doing it this way? Which has the same impact, but ultimately the outcome would be that the individual team that you're working with would feel empowered to own the outcome.
Yeah, it takes a lot of discipline not to blurt out your own opinion, I reckon.
Yeah, but you do, having built up a lot of experience in the space, it's ultimately, it's good to like compare one team with another team. And like generally speaking, folks are interested in what other businesses, other units, other industries are doing. So if you can bring that perspective to them and then enable them with that information to make the right call for them to move forward, ultimately they will own the outcome.
So
And you just provided that perspective.
you actually compare teams to each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And across different industries, I try to do work outside with a lot of Atlassian's customers and just other efforts, just to sort of compare and contrast.
Do you tell the teams like that what your observations are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being open and direct is a really important part of that first stage, what I mentioned, like of challenging. So the three phases, I always think of like challenge, enable, support. Like that first phase of challenging is bringing in different perspectives and ideas so that enables teams to really think about how they can improve how they work.
So that's fascinating to me because I do lots of facilitation work in experiential programs,
Mhm.
and every team wants to know, how are we compared to other teams you've had? And in that context, it's not always useful to say you're good or you're bad or you're middling or you're not, because each team is having their own journey and it's a mix of characters at play that are going through that discovery. You were not trying to teach a process necessarily. We're teaching individual and team observations about how they influence each other. So I'm curious, like I was curious about that. If you deliberately say, well, the teams over in engineering are doing blah, blah, blah with this, and this is some examples of what they're doing. How do they respond? Is it a competitive response or is it an eager to learn response?
I think it'll vary. I think if some folks teams might respond in a competitive way, some things will say it's all kind of terrible for us, and we could, like, the other teams are better. Some teams will have like overconfidence, or like it does really vary. And obviously that's kind of the part where the emotional intelligence and the getting people to be open and clear and direct is important. So ultimately, if you're bringing in perspective from other areas, it doesn't mean that they're right or wrong, but it's like, let's learn from those things and apply it to our domain. That's the most important step. I think a lot of the time teams will look for an answer like, oh, we should do it like that. That'd be great. If we just did that thing, then we'd be fine. But without really getting to the heart of the issue and really trying to understand the dynamic within the specific team that they're working.
Do you find that you have to spend time or energy going over basic emotional intelligence skills?
I wouldn't say necessarily going over basics, but I'm creating the environment where they're actually become part of a team's practice. So I'll give you an example of that: feedback. I'm kind of on this charge right now around meaningful feedback. Like if I said to you, hey Zoe, this has been going great, thank you very much, great job. Would you say that would be feedback or not?
No, that just makes me feel nice.
Yeah, exactly. It's lip service. I call that lip service. So it feels nice, it's great, all that stuff, but it's not actually meaningful feedback. So one of the things that would be like, hey, this, great job when you dealt with that customer and they had a really hard problem and you were really empathetic and you really structured your questions really well. And then you did these things and you followed it up. Or say you might be in a meeting or something like, hey, you set the meeting up really well and the conversation went good and you rounded out with actions and clarity at the end. That was brilliant. Plus we finished 3 minutes earlier, which is even better. We get a cup of tea before I go to the next one. Perfect. That's feedback, and it should be positive and it should be negative. I often, specifically with leadership teams, and I know a lot of your audience are in that leadership space, I'll ask leadership teams, I'm like, when was the last time someone in this room other than your boss gave you feedback? And all invariably people sort of sit there and look around and it's like, oh geez, I can't remember. Do you know what I mean? But a healthy, high-performing team will. And I think that's an important thing when you talk about some of the basic, emotional intelligence, those kind of things. It's, as a coach, making sure that you're keeping those things prevalent and actually creating the environment for them to be part of just the normal interactions that people will have.
Have you ever dealt with a team that had really poor emotional intelligence and there was a lot of chaos in the team or a lot of storming or conflict?
Yeah, absolutely. I have actually one team that was an example of a team which kind of a little bit benevolent. It was like, I'd ask them like, what can you improve? And like, oh, we're pretty good. You sure? Like everything's going, yeah, we're all, and the health monitor that I mentioned before, you kind of go through, you give things thumbs up, it's good, or thumbs sideways, it can improve, or thumbs down, and like it needs to improve. But they were green, they had thumbs up, everything was great. So this team was perfect in their view. And I was like, okay, what if I said that this area was off track and you weren't going really well, and this is the reason why? So you know how I kind of mentioned before, using questions and that sort of thing is the currency of a coach. Sometimes you need to be a little bit stronger. And this was an example of being a little bit stronger. And then that push ultimately enabled them to break down and say, oh, okay, we can improve, and these are the areas that we have opportunities to improve.
So
the other point,
let me just check. You put the mirror up to them and said, what if I told you this is what I'm seeing?
yes.
And did they accept that perspective, or did they go, whatever, you don't know what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you put that mirror up, but if you say, I spoke to these 3 other teams and this is their perception of you and this is the feedback that they've got for working with you, that's a really valuable data point to come back to say, it's like, oh, okay, maybe we could improve, or maybe, we could be easier to do business. So one of the things that we'll ask leadership teams is like, how easy are you to do business with for other parts of the business? That is a really great question, because it really gets them thinking like, oh, geez, if I had to consume what we produce as a leadership team, say I'm in marketing and I'm talking to the people from product development or whatever, how would they perceive us? And then you and you ask them to give their view, and then you go ask the other team and ask them, well, what's your perception of this team? And then you bring that data and information out into the open and you have an open discussion about it. Then that's the type of thing where you can sort of start to break down some of those misconceptions.
And do people sometimes get defensive with that?
Yeah, actually, it's actually a challenge that I've dealt with personally. It's just being defensive to feedback. I think feedback can be uncomfortable, but the opportunity, if you embrace that sense of being uncomfortable and with the sort of that growth mindset of trying to improve, if you can have people similarly aligned and with similar values to you in that space, and being open and direct, I think ultimately you'll get to a point where the team will be much happier, much healthier, and there's, from our research at least, shows that deliver better business and customer value.
Okay. Well, that's good to call out too, and if you highlight like feedback's an important part of a healthy team
Yeah.
and point out some of the hazards or tendencies that we all generally have with feedback until we mature through that, that's a good way of progressing through it. Can you tell us about the playbook, the famous Atlassian playbook?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did, we had like we often got asked like, how do your teams work? What are the things that you do? What are the practices that you do? So we thought, why don't we just open source them and share them? Atlassian's mission is ultimately to unleash the potential of every team, and we know that not just having great products is important, but it's actually those practices and behaviors that I've talked a lot about today, which is so important to helping teams to improve. So what we did is we did it for ourselves first and foremost. Is like what similar to what we described before. Is hey, you're struggling in this area. This team over here is doing really well with that. Like what? Let's share that practice. So we did that internally, and then we open sourced it and made it available. And the playbook at Atlassian.com/team-playbook has all of the activities and practices that different teams here at Atlassian do. And when we shared it publicly, it was amazing, the response. Like literally. But we shared it publicly 2016. But literally hundreds of thousands of people around the globe have used it and picked up some of the practices from there and adapted them, importantly, adapted them to their own environment, and have sent us really glowing feedback and even advocacies like, hey, this is really great, you should check it out.
Oh, look, it's amazing. I stumbled upon it. Well, it must be 2 years ago now, I think.
Yeah.
Googling team dynamics, I'm like, oh, this is an amazing resource. So, what was the URL again? Atlassian.com/team/playbook.
Team-playbook. Yeah.
Team-playbook. Okay, well, make sure that's in the show notes as well for folks so they can go and troll it and mine it for good information. Um, yeah, it's quite amazing, and the way that it's laid out is just like, here's your play or your activity. It's 10 minutes. It's easy to do. You can get these results, and here's the process. It's like, wow, it's quite an astonishing resource. Um,
Yeah, we try to make a connection with the Health Monitor. So Health Monitor is like a diagnostic tool to find where your team is going well and where it can improve. So that's like the first step. Like do that first. There's
Yep.
an hour-long discussion, a couple of key areas for a project or a product team or a leadership team or a service team or whatever. And then from there you go like, oh, we really need to, like us mentioned before, we need to improve and have clarity around our purpose, our shared understanding. Why do we exist as a team? And then from there you can dive into the plays, and that's kind of the link. So one play that I really love is called an elevator pitch. So say, for example, we're working together on a team, Zoe, and we're not clear on what our purpose is and how we'll measure success. So then we run into an activity like an elevator pitch, and we run that. So essentially an elevator pitch is, as it says, it's a pitch for the team. So, what are we doing? Why are we delivering it? How are we going to deliver value? That sort of stuff. I've actually done it with some teams, and I put them in an elevator that's like, level 8, and said, by the time you get to the bottom, you have to pitch your team to me. And we're all sitting in the elevator. It's kind of a bit weird, but it just really reinforced the behavior, that like having that clear, concise version of why we exist.
I love it. So let's play sardines in the elevator, and you get to get to pitch your team's purpose.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious about if your perspective has changed about teams and culture over the years.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Obviously, team dynamics is evolving and changing and those sort of things. But underpinning that, some of the behaviors are pretty similar at the same time as being aligned and those sort of things. But one of the things that I think has really changed, in my perspective at least, is the focus from technical expertise and technical excellence to that kind of behavioral interaction. I think in the past we'd often train and build technical skills to be as good technically as we could, but without that connection across multiple disciplines and different teams or different individual types or personality types even, that's where teams start to break down. So that's where that interbehavioral connection, feeling like a sense of belonging and all of these type of things has been a really area for us to continue to build and improve.
That's what I call the people stuff. And one of my core principles is people before task. People first, task second is one of the ways that I like to operate with teams as well. And it's you can use Pareto's principle with that too. I'm not sure if you agree with this.
Yeah.
Whereas you use like 20% of your time spent on people stuff delivers 80% of the results. And you spend 80% of your time on the technical doing side of things, and it gets the job done. But it's the 20-80 thing. 20% invested in relationships and communication and dynamics will speed things up dramatically and help accelerate. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that's good. I'd extend it a little bit also to in bringing, your customer into that conversation too. Like ultimately, the dynamic within the group of people working together on a particular team is important, but how you interact with those people around you within an organization and then your ultimate end customer is really important. So why do people employ your product or service or whatever you produce? What do they want to get out of it, and how do you better service their needs? So bringing that into the discussion is really important.
Yeah, you can't forget about the people who are actually on the receiving end of what you're doing. It makes total sense to me for sure. I'm curious, does Atlassian measure its own culture? Do you measure, you talk about measuring what the teams are doing, the outcomes of the team. As an organization, do you talk about measuring Atlassian culture in any way?
Yeah, I think measuring culture is an interesting one. Obviously, a lot of it is subjective and all those type of things. We're very focused on getting having regular feedback points and making sure that everyone can contribute to our culture. But we expect our culture to evolve and change and adapt over time. But what's important to us is that we stay true to our values. So our values are the thing that underpin who we are and that sort of thing, and the type of people that will be able to be effective here, and the type of people that we want to be when we come to work. And we expect our culture to adapt and change over time.
So that means, if I've heard that correctly, it's you get feedback to see how you're going. You don't necessarily have like an employee net promoter score that you use to measure things like that, or do you?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of different data points to consider and look at, whether it be from staff feedback or sentiment from like a performance review process, all our normal like people processes, I would suppose.
Uh-huh.
But the important thing is keeping grounded in our values and using our values in unison to underpin how we work.
What word would you use to describe the Atlassian culture?
Oh, one word. Wow.
Yeah, one word.
Real.
Real.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
I think like we do what we say. I'll give you an example. One of our values is play as a team, and it's play, as a team. So it's really important that when we work together, it's playful, we enjoy it, and that type of stuff. And making sure that we're doing that and we're recognizing points of that is important. Another one of our values is don't F the customer.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And we have another one, open company, no BS as well. So these are the type of things that are easy to remember, and they're really sort of true and real to the way we live and work every day. You'll often see very vanilla kind of values like integrity or courage or innovation or disruption, like whatever it is. It's hard to make that concrete, and it's hard to make that real. What do we mean when you say be innovative? Like, what does that mean? But having an open company with no BS, that's something it's very easy. It's like when there's something to be called out, we call it out.
Yeah.
And what we do is we try and put we're obviously always looking for ways to reinforce those core values.
And how do you do that? Like, so always looking for ways to reinforce that. So what does that mean in practical terms? There's posters and things like that. Is that what you mean? Or do you mean more storytelling? How do you
Yeah,
bring it to life?
yeah, definitely not posters. Yeah, they're nice to be reminded. I think there's a number of different ways that we do it. Obviously, we hire on values. So we want to make sure through our hiring process that we have a values interview step. The values interview step is a really important step to make sure that people who do start at Atlassian are values aligned. And as a values interviewer, you can kind of ask, regardless of technical skills, you can decide a candidate's not suitable, and then no questions asked, the candidate will get the feedback, and then they won't go through, and then we'll review why that particular candidate wasn't a good values fit or whatever it may be. We also have an internal program here which we call Kudos. So you can give or receive feedback to a colleague, another Atlassian staff member, to say, hey, Here's some meaningful feedback. I thought you were fantastic because you were. We had this tough situation, and you called it out. You were so on point. You were open company, no bullshit, and you really got to the heart of the issue for us. So thank you very much for that. So that's a kudos thing. Like give and receive gifts from folks, and there's no real regulation on that. Like I could give anyone a kudos as many as I want. It's a small gift. It's like $30 movie voucher or something of that nature. And that's a nice way to consistently reinforce the values. But the most important thing around values is that we see people and we look for opportunities where people actually role model and live them.
Yeah, nice. That's beautiful. Bernie, that's awesome. So one last question. If you had to give like your rule number one for being a high performing team, what would that be?
Um, Prevention, not cure. Like always be looking to continually improve. I think that sort of sense that you're never done, that sense that you're always trying to consistently improve and be better with how you work to deliver a higher value is so important. So that consistent focus of wanting to take stock, move away from the day-to-day execution. Like if I often use an analogy or a story here is to say, if you think about the most high performance environments, you often go to like the world of sport, or you might go to like the arts or whatever, and you think like, how much time do they spend in like practice and preparation versus execution? So take, for example, a high performing sports team or something like that. They might spend like 95% of their time practicing and preparing, and then game day is like one day a week kind of thing. But where in business, the complete opposite is true. You spend almost 98% of your time just delivering, executing, and then very little time taking that introspection and that time to improve. So I think that balance is wrong. I think it needs to kind of adjust. And I think the most high performing teams will get that balance right, where they're actually taking time to like always review their performance and look for areas to improve.
Fantastic. That's a great piece of sage advice. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It was wonderful to hear your experience and insight as a team coach and the wonderful world of Atlassian.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks for having me.